so much pleasure to introduce my friend Lisa Volpe, who is the Associate Curator of Photography at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And we are really lucky that Lisa said yes to this conversation because she is a very busy woman and kindly made time for us today after a day of reviewing portfolios of Cuban photographers. Lisa came into my orbit many years ago when she was a curator at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art and working towards her doctorate at UC Santa Barbara. I've watched her career explode over these years and am amazed by all of her stellar achievements. She earned an MA at Case Western University and her PhD at University of California, Santa Barbara. At the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, she oversees the Ann Tucker and Clint Willauer Young Photographers Endowment, the Cherry Hurst House Fellowship, and an emerging commission project in addition to a regular schedule of exhibitions and acquisitions. Previously, she held various curatorial roles at the Wichita Art Museum, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and fellowships at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the Cleveland Museum of Art. Lisa just opened an exhibition that she curated and researched called Georgia O'Keefe Photographer at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And there is a link in the chat. And I really recommend watching the video that goes with it. It's so fascinating. It runs through January 17th, 2022. It's the first exhibition devoted to O'Keefe's work as a photographer. First ever, pretty amazing. Nearly 100 photographs from newly examined archives reveal the American icon's modernist approach to the medium. And complementing the photographs are paintings and drawings that represent the full scope of her career, and an incredible catalog accompanies that exhibition. And before I hand this over to Lisa, I want to thank her for her intelligent and informative Instagram posts about work that the museum has collected. Her posts are insightful reads, helping us, as Carrie James Marshall states, to know what they know. They being this very capable and talented curator, Lisa Volpe. Welcome.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm red-faced and I don't think I deserve it, but I'll take it. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I mean, I really love talking about photography, about my job. I don't really get to do that a lot. You know, the people I work with know what I do, and my family does not care. So it's nice to be able to chat about it for a little bit. And it's really interesting to just look back at where I've been and where I hope to go to kind of curate my own personality as a curator. So I thought I'd start with this image. This is, of course, the amazing photographer and Houstonian Kelly Anderson Staley, who invited my husband and I over for a portrait session one day in the middle of the Houston blazing summer, but was able to make it like the most insane pleasure of my life. And usually in my exhibitions, I try and start with an image that expresses the themes and the emotions that I want to convey throughout the exhibition. So this photograph seemed really right. I love being a curator, so any grumpiness that you perceive through the course of this presentation is because I'm tired right now. I haven't been in the museum for quite a few days, which means I can't be with the art, which is what I really love. And I thought it was also a great picture because my story is not complete at all without the help of others, without other people really directing behind the scenes. And so throughout this, I really want to highlight those amazing friends, family, mentors that have helped me get where I am today. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. I always loved art as a child. I was the kid that was constantly drawing or painting for birthdays and holidays. All I wanted were art supplies, Play-Doh, paints, anything that I could get my hands on. In 8th grade, I really thought I had my entire path as an artist laid out before me because every year they choose the artwork by one 8th grader to buy for the school and hang in the hallways, and mine was chosen. It's that horrible like pheasant thing that's above my head in the photo on the right. Terrible. As a curator today, I would not pick that one, but as an 8th grader whose work was chosen, I was really psyched about the whole thing. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, where options to see art were extremely limited. And you may know Youngstown. If you do not, great, you're probably happier for it. But if you do, you might be a fan of Bruce Springsteen, who wrote a super depressing song about it. Or you might be a hardcore Sopranos fan, as the Sopranos core family came from Youngstown. So those should tell you 2 things about my hometown. But it's very blue collar, mostly immigrants. Both of my grandparents from both sides immigrated from Italy to find jobs in the steel mills. The food is great, the atmosphere, not so much. Youngstown actually became a huge subject in photography following the recession and the whole ruin porn phase in photography. So it was a very strange and out-of-body experience to see photographs like these of my hometown come across my desk while I was sitting in Santa Barbara, California. There is one small museum in Youngstown, Ohio, and like everything else in that town, its glory days are far behind it. It's called the Butler Institute of American Art, and it's actually the first fully American art museum in the country. I learned that later. I didn't know that then. Today, it has a very limited staff of mostly volunteers, and I love this photo because they've like plopped like a weird like used car dealer sign on top of this beautiful marble sign that is for the entrance to the building. It just shows kind of how the town doesn't know what to do with a museum in a lot of ways. Once a year, on school field trips, I would get to visit the Butler. And it was like a time capsule in there. Nothing changed. There was no rotation of the collection, no acquisitions, nothing new. They never brought anything old out. What was on the walls, and it stayed there in the exact same spot, which for a kid was pretty great because you could see your favorites time. You actually knew exactly where they were in the galleries. I would always love to see Winslow Homer's Snap the Whip. It's on the top left. It's one of the crown jewels of that place. And John Singer Sargent's Mrs. Knowles and Her Children. I loved these things. I especially loved the Singer Sargent. His brushwork, oh my gosh, even as a kid, I remember just sitting in front of that and looking at that sketchy that somehow becomes the edge of the lace shoulder on her dress. How does this happen? Like, it would just blow me away. And I would go home with my like dollar set of watercolors and try and replicate it. And it just was not working out at all. But despite this lack of any museums or galleries or really any place to see art, my mother was the one that encouraged my artistic leanings. Again, she bought me art supplies every Christmas, always let me build and sculpt things around the house. She didn't get mad when a weird Play-Doh sculpture I built took the finish off of her walnut table. She just rubbed that thing down with some walnuts and went on with life. But she would also tell me stories about her father, who was an amateur artist and was a photographer, in fact. Growing up, they had a darkroom in their basement, and her father, after he got home from work and after he had dinner with the family, talked to them a little and everyone would start going to bed, he would go down into the basement and start printing photos. my mother used to tell me that she would wake up in the morning and find photographs floating in the bathtub. They were doing their final rinse there. And it was such a magical image for a little kid that was interested in art. I hadn't gotten to explore a darkroom yet, but I was already hooked. Like the fact that it could connect me to my past in this interesting way, but like past that really spoke to me was so, so great. Somehow, and I still don't know how, I ended up at Dartmouth College for college. And it was freshman fall that I discovered what art history was. Growing up in Youngstown, Ohio, I knew I liked art, but in a culture like that, there's only one path for someone who likes art. You become an artist. That's all we knew. That's all that was available to me at the time. But during my freshman fall, I got the course catalog, I remember, and I was flipping through and I said, art history, what is this? And I went shopping, you know, when you do the class shopping the first week, and I sat in my first art history class. It was Renaissance art with Adrian Randolph, and I still remember it was like one of those moments where the earth just shifts because I knew this was it. Like I couldn't believe how much I loved it just from that one moment. And yes, this is art in the dark, people. This is like sitting down in a room, you know, it's Dartmouth, so it's small. There's like 8 of us in these uncomfortable chairs, looking at 2 slides at a time on a screen. But I loved every single second of it. I loved learning the slides. I loved learning more about all these eras of art that I knew nothing about. And I called my parents and I said, this is what I wanted to do. And they said, what is that? And it was funny because at the moment I couldn't even define what an art historian did. I just knew that I loved it. And then I took a class with this man, Jim Jordan. He's retired now, but I've seen him recently at a CAA, a College Art Association conference, and he remembered me, and it like made my whole world. He even remembered what I wrote about. And that was really special to me because Professor Jordan wasn't focused on learning slides. It wasn't just about the facts in his class. Yes, we still had to learn like hundreds and hundreds of slides for every test, but his assignments were write me a narrative about your experience with art. And it was so incredible to me because up until then, I didn't realize that I had permission to bring my own story to a work of art. And he was the first one that opened that door for me, that like my personal experience was a valid foundation for understanding great works of art that I was looking at. It was totally incredible. Thank you, Professor Jordan. I still love you. I had gone to Dartmouth, of course, to be a studio artist because that's what I knew. And I continued to do that. I ended up graduating with a modified major, which basically means you're doing 2 majors at the same time with just like a little bit less of a requirement in each of art history and studio art. And so I spent entirely too long in the darkroom. To this day, I love darkrooms. They're the most magical places on earth. And this was the pinnacle of the CD, you know, everyone had like 5,000 CDs and we all brought them in those big black binders. Do you remember those where you'd slide like 4 CDs into each page? There were thousands of CDs in this darkroom at Dartmouth College. And yet the only one we ever played was Stevie Wonder's greatest hits. I cannot tell you why. But to this day, if I hear any Stevie Wonder song, I smell the chemicals, and I am right back in that dark room. Now, you might be wondering what's happening with my presentation on the right here. This is not a mistake. I'm not missing a slide. My senior year, I was actually what I called the mistress of the darkroom, but what really was called by the school the darkroom tech. And it was my job to change out and clean the dark rooms and change out the chemicals in both the black and white dark room, which you see on your left, and the color dark room, which you see or don't see on your right. Because as everyone knows, at that moment, you had to work in complete and utter darkness in the color dark room. So always fun to bump around in there to Stevie Wonder, really. And this is the woman at Dartmouth, my photography professor, Virginia Bean. Many of you might know her photographs, who taught me to photograph not like work I had seen, to not try and replicate other things in the world that I knew of or that I thought were quote unquote good art, but to really dig inside and to figure out what I was interested in and what I wanted to say. Virginia, finding out that one of our photography classes was for women, decided it was a perfect opportunity for us all to do nude self-portraits, which I don't think you could get away with, perhaps, but it was a very freeing experience. So to this day, I have to thank her for that. Also at Dartmouth, I knew by my senior year that art history can lead you down two paths, either teaching or being a curator. And I wasn't sure which one I wanted to do until another light bulb moment happened. I was sitting in contemporary art class, art history class, again, art in the dark, looking at some slides. And our professor concluded class by congratulating one of the other students on getting a hood internship. I had no idea what this was. I was still at this moment just running to catch up with my classmates, many of whom had come from wealthy families, had visited every major museum in the country and possibly the world. So I had never really taken the time to explore what was in my own backyard. Turns out that the museum at Dartmouth College has internships for a limited number of students every year, in which they go through the entire process of learning to be a curator. I vowed to get one of those internships. And so the next year I did. And it really, really made me realize I wanted to be a curator. This is Kathy Hart. She's the assistant director at the Hood Museum. She was the one that interviewed me for the position, guided me through the process once I had gotten it. And to this day, I remember Kathy complimenting the exhibition I got to do at the end of the year. And I chose the topic of time as the fifth dimension and how artists deal with a concept of time. And Kathy thought this was a really original idea. I still love Kathy. We still talk quite a bit, actually. And whenever I have a question to dealing with how I engage, students or a class, Kathy is the first one that I call. She was also the one that suggested that I look at Case Western Reserve for grad school. It's a master's program that's actually taught within the Cleveland Museum of Art. So all of the courses are co-taught by both a curator and a professor. And when I applied, I magically, again, have no idea how, was offered the Cleveland Museum of Art Fellowship, which is held by only one student in the program at a time. And I got to work with Tom Hinson at the Cleveland Museum of Art for 2 years. Now, many of you might know Tom, but you probably don't know him like I do because he thought I had to earn the right to ever enter the vault to see where the photographs were kept. So he would set up process quizzes for me to make sure that I could identify all the photographic processes before I was allowed to get access to the vault. Tough, but really, really fantastic. And on the right, this is Anne Helmrich. She is now the assistant director at the Getty Foundation. She's in your neck of the woods. But then she was a professor of 19th and 20th century art at Case Western Reserve. So the only problem with going to Case was that there was no professor on staff that taught photo history. In my mind, I thought that was okay because I was working with Tom and like this would be great. I'd be in a museum all the time, but I did need to learn some things still. So Anne was so terrific to me. She and I did directed reading courses every semester, which basically meant she gave me a list of things to read every week. And then I would sit down in her office and one-on-one, I'd be quizzed on what I read, and then we would chat about it. An intense way to learn photo history for sure, but like also what an immersive, amazing way to do it for someone to literally, direct you personally through that history was incredible. But I knew I wanted to actually learn from photo historians, and so I kind of knew I had to go to California. All of you in LA should truly appreciate that photo history is so strong there, that it's taught in the colleges and universities as kind of an essential course. Because in my time, that was not happening on the East Coast. I went through my entire Dartmouth career and there was only one class in photo history ever taught in 4 years. But on the West Coast, that was different. And so I decided I wanted to study in California. And I decided I wanted to go to Santa Barbara to work with Bruce Robertson, who you see at the bottom on the right, who split his time as a professor and a curator. Bruce was the chief curator at LACMA for quite a bit, and then became the director of the University Art Museum at Santa Barbara. And Bruce is the most practical human that you will ever meet. The first time I entered his office in Santa Barbara, he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to be done as quickly as possible." And he said, "Great." And we sat there and we sketched out a timeline of the rest of my graduate career, and like perfectly structured. It was all great. And I always give Bruce's advice to others who are struggling through grad school. The best dissertation is a done dissertation. So just send that thing in and get on with your life. And Bruce is also known for producing curators. It was the reason I really wanted to go and work with him. There's an ongoing joke in the curatorial world that Bruce produces an army. So there are quite a few of us out in the world. Austin Bailey, who's the chief curator at Crystal Bridges Museum, is a Bruce student. Cody Hartley, who is the director of the OKeefe Museum, you'll hear about a little bit later, is a Bruce student. That's just Veronica Roberts here in Austin is a Bruce student that's just scratching the surface. He produces curators. It's Bruce's army, as we call ourselves. And I studied with Abigail Solomon Godot there. She was my other advisor. If you don't know her, she is the fiercest photo theorist to ever walk the earth. And if Bruce's students are an army, then, and I think she would forgive me for saying this, Abigail's students are more akin to prisoners of war. And I say that like lovingly, but she challenges students. You will turn in a paper for Abigail and you will think you're a good writer, and you will realize very quickly she will make you think about every word that you put on the page in a drastically new way. And we all can't thank her enough for that, really. But the most important person I met in California, in fact, my dearest mentor, friend, and my guardian angel, and I'm trying not to cry, was Karen Sinzheimer. Whew. When I arrived in Santa Barbara, I immediately got on the bus and went down to the Santa Barbara Museum of Art and asked Karen for an internship. I knew her name from photo history books. I wanted to work with her desperately. So she took me on as an intern, and 6 months later, she hired me as her assistant. So I split my time from there on out, working 35 hours a week with Karen and going to grad school and finishing my dissertation. And what school does not and cannot teach, Karen taught me. She taught me everything. about being a successful curator, about treating everyone with the respect they deserve, about always putting artists first because they are the reason we have a job, about respecting the wishes of donors and approaching them as friends and not just sources of money. Really, all of my success can be traced back to something that Karen taught me. So sadly, after 7 years working with Karen and loving every single minute of it, it was time to leave her. Now, I heard through the grapevine at this moment that Ann Tucker, curator extraordinaire at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, was retiring. Now, Ann Tucker, this is the curator that Time magazine called Curator of the Year. And in my mind, I had this perfectly laid out. I thought, okay, Ann's going to retire. Her assistant curator will move up into that position. That means there's going to be a space for an assistant curator. I'm going to apply, I'm going to get that job, and I'm going to work my way up. Well, before I knew it, this was what I saw on Art News. It was that, yeah, Ann's retiring, but they're not moving up her assistant curator. They're just bringing in another senior curator, Malcolm Daniel, who had spent 25 years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This frustrated me to no end, I cannot tell you. And I kept thinking, oh, photo curators, it's just a game of musical chairs. I'm never gonna get a chair when the music stops. And so I got mad and I went off to Wichita, Kansas for a little bit, where I worked as the senior curator at that museum. And it was a great learning experience, learning how to budget for an entire organization. But 3 years later, I saw a post for an associate curator of photography at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. And before I knew it, I was back in front of these exact same 3 people whose faces I was cursing 3 years before. Anne, our director, Gary Tinterow in the center, and Malcolm Daniel interviewing for a job. And I got it. And it's fine to tell that story because I told Malcolm later he's the reason I went to Wichita. It's all his fault. It's all a big joke now, but. So in Houston, I've just been having the time of my life. The collection is amazing. We have over 35,000 photographs from every point in the history of photography. Every continent and nation is represented, and we're consistently growing the collection. We have acquisition meetings 5 times a year, and in total, we acquire about 800 to 1,000 additional photographs every year. My first major exhibition in Houston is something that you all might be kind of familiar with. I was in charge of taking on Icons of Style, which was the history of fashion photography that was first seen at the Getty. But for its presentation in Houston, we had to alter it drastically. We wanted to bring it up to the present day. The original exhibition ended in 2011. And we also wanted the exhibition to reflect more of the diversity of Houston. Houston is very proud of the fact that it is the most diverse city in the country. And our visitors are very diverse. And I am very passionate about everyone seeing themselves reflected on the walls of exhibitions. And not just in certain sections or certain time periods, but throughout. So of the 200 photographs that were in the original exhibition, I only took about 100 of them, and then supplemented with another 100 that we found for our presentation, which ended up being really, really fun, really fantastic. On the bottom right, I should have gotten a better picture of it. If you kind of look in the background, you can see this checkered floor. Because we are in Texas, we had a bunch of pictures of Selena and then invited our visitors to strike a pose like Selena, which was a really, really popular part of that exhibition. Actually, I was just on Instagram the other day, and if you look at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, it's still one of the top posts, all the photos like Selena, which is really fun. I've gotten to learn about and explore an entire new realm of photography. This was African lens, modern and contemporary photographs from the African subcontinent. We are really passionate about growing our collection of photography by artists living and working in Africa currently, especially those from Nigeria. Houston has the largest Nigerian population outside of Nigeria. And there are a lot of amazing Nigerian photographers working right now. So I've become pen pals with a lot of them. We write emails back and forth, and they're always really great about introducing me to their colleagues that they think I should know about too. So that is how I'm finding photographers in Nigeria. It's mostly word of mouth. It's been really fun. I can't wait to go, but COVID has kind of put a damper on that. I've also taken on time-based media duties at the museum. I've gone to a lot of workshops in order to really polish my skills in how time-based media should be thought of when it is acquired, what the conservation concerns are, what the installation concerns are. This is a work by Dion Lee called A Use for Rope or String. This is a space that is pretty consistently used for video art that I curate quite a bit. And of course, because we're in Texas and we just, plow through and everything's fine here. In the middle of the pandemic, when most museums were closed, we were open and in fact opened an entire new building. So in November 2020, we opened the Nancy and Rich Kinder Building for Modern and Contemporary Art. It has 3 floors. The first floor is for installation art. The second floor has individual galleries for any of the modern and contemporary departments. So photography, prints and drawings, Latin American, decorative arts and design. And then the third floor is thematic exhibitions that all the departments collaborate on. So this is the new photography galleries. 3 galleries, 1 very large, a medium, and a small size black box gallery for video art. We really love our galleries. We're so proud of them. We're so proud that we get to display more of our collection at this point. It's 35,000 works. We want to get them all up on the walls. We call it a history of photography because we alternate and change it in the large gallery. In the medium-sized gallery right now, we have very large-scale contemporary photography that you can see at the upper right, and then a rotating schedule of video art in our black box. So it's been really, really, really wonderful to work in a space that is all our own, that we don't have to trade on and off with anyone. And currently on display is an exhibition that I've been working for a little over 3 years on, titled Georgia O'Keefe Photographer, which is the first exhibition of photographs made by Georgia O'Keefe. If you did not know she was a photographer, you are not alone. It was never talked about until now, though I always say O'Keefe told us herself she was a photographer and left breadcrumbs for us to follow. One of the only books she ever wrote in her life is a 1976 Viking Press book called Georgia O'Keefe, and she had control over every aspect of this book, what paintings would be in it. She wrote the text for it, the size of the book, the paper type, everything. She was in complete control. And across from a painting titled Road Past the View, she writes about using her camera to see the landscape anew. And so it was right there all the time in O'Keefe's own words, just waiting to be found. So I'm just very proud that I was the one that got to do that. And it was a long process. Here's the catalog on the left. I hope you all are interested enough to get a copy. It took me all this time to really track down and attribute all the photographs that I could. It began because Cody Hartley, one of Bruce's Army members, came to me one day and said, you know, we have a box of photographs that's just sitting here at the OKeefe Museum, and we think some of them are by Georgia O'Keeffe. They're not signed, they're not dated, you know, you'd have to do all of that work. And I basically said, sign me up. So I spent the next 3 years looking at every possible photograph and negative that could have been O'Keeffe's. This is all explained more in detail in that link that was put in the chat, but I'd become an expert in crazy things like Adobe. Knowing when O'Keeffe remudded her Adobe home often helped me date the photographs, and being able to visually tell the difference between mud Adobe and cement Adobe, which, by the way, mud's on the left, cement's on the right. Thanks to the help of some architectural preservationists in Santa Fe, I was able to date these things within a year or two. I worked with river guides on Glen Canyon because O'Keeffe took 3 trips up and down Glen Canyon, stopping at different places on each of those trips. So if I could identify the place, then I could identify the date. So the wonderful Ryan Savino, who was busy leading river trips, still found it within her power to pack her bag with these images I had sent her and help me identify different locations. I was joking earlier, if there's something that I am known for forever connected with O'Keeffe, it will be her Chows. Everyone knew she owned Chows. No one knew how many she had or when she had them. But there were all these photographs of Chows, and in order to date them, I kind of had to know which group was what Chow. So I worked with Chow breeders to help sort the Chow photos into piles, eventually identify those dogs by lining up paper types with letters describing the dogs. You can see the column on the right is all her personal letters that mention the dogs. And we now know, thanks to all of this exhaustive research, she owned 8 Chows. And the reason it was so complicated is because she recycled names. There's Bo 2, there's Chia 2, Chia 3, Inca 2. Like, it's just insanity, guys. But we now have the definitive Chow family tree. There it is. That's what I'll be known for forever. I guess I'll take it. I'm not quite sure. And just one more shout out to Paul Messier, conservator extraordinaire at Yale, who is building the most incredible archive and database of photographic papers. Do you guys know about this? He is collecting every single paper type that he can get his hands on, scanning it into his database. So you see here that this is just one paper. This is Kodak Velox Unikontrast Rapid from 1950. The back stamping looks like this. It looks like this under raking light. The paper weave will be this big. And because I kind of knew what papers O'Keeffe was using, I was able to beg samples from Paul Messier in order to compare my now little sample to possible O'Keeffe photos to see if the paper types matched up. So thank you, Paul. I sent them back. He wanted them back. I understand. But it was an incredible resource and opens up a huge new avenue for photographic research. So all of that, in addition to the exhibition and some essays, resulted in this. This is the one page, one spread of the census of known prints that I've now put together and put in the back of the catalog. All 409 photographic images that can be confidently attributed to O'Keeffe, along with notes as to, whether it's cropped or if it has any handwriting or if it shows any usage wear on the back, letters that might match up with it, paper type, all of those things. So these are now this is now the catalog raisonné of O'Keefe's photographs. So something that I'm proud of. Took a long time. I'm never doing it again. So, so that's it. And, you know, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can kind of talk to you guys one-on-one and answer questions. You know, one of the things I did want to mention is, like, as a curator, what people often get wrong about what we do. You know, the first thing everyone has to remember is there's always oversight. There's so many levels of oversight. You know, first I have to get director approval for anything, and then 2 committees on top of that have to approve any acquisition I make, any exhibition that I'm proposing. We plan, as a large Titanic of a museum, we plan 5 years in advance. If you ask me right now what I'm doing in 2016, I can tell you. So, you know, when photographers come to me and say, you know, I have this exhibition, it's available next year, there is no way. Like, it's just never, ever, ever going to happen. An institution of our size can't survive if it would be, you know, scheduling like that. And then acquisitions, I know that's a big topic. If a photo is less than $50,000, which is really most photos in the world, I have to raise the money for it. So when you think about that and think that we are acquiring at a rate of 800 to 1,000 photographs every year, I am pounding the pavement quite a lot in order to bring those photographs into the museum. We have very few endowments for the purchase of photography, even for a museum that's so well known for its photographs. So I have to find a donor in order to bring a work in. And gifts. It might seem like a gift, but I always call it a bill for perpetuity. There is there's an actual, oh my gosh, my mathematician brother would be so embarrassed of me right now. There is a formula, there it is, found the word. There is a formula that can tell you how much money museums spend on the care and feeding of any object in the collection. It has to do with square footage and how many people are employed to, like, keep it and what kind of archival material you're using. But on average, we're spending about $500 a year per photograph to keep them all nice and tidy. So if you offer me a gift, you're offering me a $500 bill for the next 200 years. So we have to really want the gifts too. And I think that's often something photographers don't understand. But at this point, I'm going to turn it back over.
Wow, Lisa, that was so incredible. I mean, we never get to see sort of the personal history of how someone becomes a curator. And that was so fascinating. Again, I really encourage you to watch the video that she did, because one thing that struck me is, like, she's like this CSI team for photography. Like, so much of what she had to do with the Georgia O'Keeffe work was detective work and reaching out. I mean, she just told me before we started that she found the veterinarian for those chows that has, you know, like, this is not something, you know, normally a curator is looking at. So, so fascinating. And thank you so much. Wow.
I learned long ago, pride will get you nowhere. So I will send an email to anyone, trust me.
Yeah.
If you don't answer my email, a phone call is coming next. So I'm just gonna find you until, you know, the first no is never the no. I wait until the hell no. So
yeah. This is an incredible opportunity for you to ask a question of a curator, of a significant curator that you've never asked. So put it in the chat. I thought it would be interesting if you could just tell us what, like, a day in your life looks like.
It's always different, so that's a difficult thing to say. Um, Karen used to say, Karen Sinzheimer used to say that curating was everything under the sun but big rig truck driving, and she was just waiting till they made her get her license. So I think that that's pretty accurate. Like, except for driving the truck of art, like I do most other things. So this, I'll take today for an example. This morning I woke up, I had to write acquisition papers in order to turn them in on time to present things for Friday for possible future acquisition. They're about 5 pages long per object, so it takes a while. Answered some emails, made some phone calls, had a Zoom call with a gallerist who wanted me to see a show, but I can't get to New York anytime soon, so he kind of walked me through with his phone. Oh my goodness. What else did I do? I had portfolio reviews with Cuban photographers today, had a radio interview for OKeefe. I don't know, lots of stuff. You know, it's not a day-to-day thing, it's like a hour-to-hour thing. It's like, what am I doing in the next 30
Yeah.
minutes? Yeah.
And you also shared with me that you have 3 more exhibitions that you have curated coming up. And in your talk, you said 2016, but I think you meant 2026.
Yes, sorry. I don't even know
Yeah.
what the year is apparently anymore. Yes, I did mean 2026. Thank you.
Yeah. So you know that you're thinking that far out about showing work. And I think many photographers think, oh, I can get in next year, but it might be a 10-year wait if you're interested in the work. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's something I always encourage photographers. Like when you are going to a portfolio review and you are looking at the list of reviewers and they have their institutions next to their name, there's a reason for that, but it should also clue you in on in terms of like our differing timelines. Like curators at massive institutions like mine were thinking at least 3, more likely 5 years out. But smaller institutions by nature can be a bit more nimble. So if you have now, don't come see me. I really cannot help you. But if you have a project that you're thinking about for the long term, or you are genuinely just looking for feedback, I'm happy to see it. But I have so many photographers sit down and say, and I say, hi, nice to meet you. What can I do for you today? And they say, well, I want an acquisition or an exhibition. And I've kind of like, I'm a little over it at this point. So I say, like, well, I'm not going to do either of those. So what do we talk about for the next 19 minutes? So it's just know who you're going to see and why that person and what they can do for you. I cannot give you a solo exhibition. It's just not going to happen.
yeah. I was also thinking about some of the themes that you may be preparing as a curatorial expression might be out of date in 5 years or might not. And I'm just wondering if that's something you think about as a curator, because there's so many things that are in the now, but in
Yeah.
5 years from now, they might not feel as interesting or as important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I was if I ruled the world and I was more in control, I would flip flop some of the exhibitions that I'm doing. O'Keefe would have never opened right now. It wouldn't have, but it was on the calendar. This was the schedule. The book was at the printer. Like, this is just the world I live in. Um, I am very committed to reflecting my community, my audience, and that includes social issues. So while I can acquire things, we were acquiring a lot from the protests. I can't get those up on the walls as quickly as I might like. Like, I can put some things in our galleries now, and that's really lovely. But, my next project is part of the series of Gordon Parks shows done with the Parks Foundation. And I specifically chose his 1967 essay on Stokely Carmichael and the definition of Black power, because I want to make the point that it is no different than Black Lives Matter. And so for me, if that could have come now or the year before, I would have been thrilled. Like, I hope by next year at this time, we won't need that anymore. I mean, sadly, I don't think that'll be the case, but like, yeah, you're right. Like sometimes it's not aligned with the timeline I wish it would be on.
We've got some great questions, but I just have a couple to ask you. What do artists need to know about working with a curator? What's their responsibility, and what makes your job easier when working with someone?
I know you, like if I'm choosing to work with you as an artist, you've already sold me on the work. Like you don't need to, you know, give me the sales pitch anymore. I'm in. You know, what I do need from you is a clear vision for how you want that work displayed or articulated. Now, when I say that, that does not mean I want you to like do the installation plan. And the reason I say that is I've had a lot of artists come to me and say like, well, here's how it would look in the gallery. And that is not true because you don't know my galleries. I know my galleries. I know you can't hang something there of that size because you can't see it when you come around the corner or, you know, and I know my audience. So I know what should be on the big thing at the sight line. You know, those are the things that a curator brings to the table in terms of the installation process and knowing the people we work for and work with and the community that we're in. Artist, I want you to know your work upside down, back, front, you know, that you would really prefer these frames because, you know, for, you know, have all those reasons spelled out. And it's not a budgetary thing. Like, if there's a strong enough reason and I can put you in front of some donors, we can find the money. If it's a wishy-washy reason, you know, then I can't do anything for you. So just be like confident in your vision for the work in that way and be organized too. There's a lot of artists actually during the pandemic, and I'm going to chalk it up to like pandemic stress that we've all been going through, who will like send me PDFs of available work and some of it's not available anymore after I choose it. And let me tell you, like my desire to acquire something goes down really quickly because I got really excited about this one thing. And then you're like, don't have it anymore. I'm like, well, now I feel like I'm getting the leftovers. Like, don't show it to me if I can't have it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to dig into some of these questions and keep them coming if you have them. Ken says, I have a collection of over 10,000 4x5 black and white negatives from photographer Ray McSavany, who passed away in 2014. His work is collected at the Huntington Library, Portland Art Museum, Center of Creative Photography. Any suggestions for finding a home for some of his botanical negatives and include some of his signed mounted photographs?
You are going to have a much easier time with the photographs than the negatives. You know, I will speak for us. We don't touch negatives. It's just not something that we want to dive into. It's an endless well. We don't want to even put our toe in the water. And all of these things take up space. I mean, I'm sure with how many negatives was it? That's a lot of space that would be taken up for one artist's work. Negatives, you know, things we can't even show on the gallery walls that could be utilized for actual prints. So in terms of finding a home for the negatives, the luck you might have is with places like here in Houston, we have the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, which is a branch of the public library. They have digital archives for the city of Houston. So wherever this photographer is from, It's places like that that will take the negatives and take the time to scan them and put them online. The prints, however, you'll have luck with museums.
Swanee says, Lisa, I've never forgotten something you shared in the past, that when you sit down at a portfolio review table, you bring with you a visual Rolodex of the 35,000 images in the collection. And as you look at a portfolio, you are in fact considering how an artist's work can exist in conversation with the works in the collection. Can you
Yes,
expand on that?
that is exactly right. That is part of the job. I remember asking Kathy Hart, whose photo you saw in the little circle related to the internship at the Hood. I said, what is the best skill for a curator to have? And she said, a visual memory. And I think that she knows what she's talking about. She was spot on. Part of our jobs is to know what is in the collection and remember what it looks like. So a lot of times Malcolm and I are sitting there saying, like, it's the photo that looks like this and blah, blah, blah. Like, it is what the thing looks like is sunk into our brains. Sometimes, like, the name and date takes a while to come up, but we know what things look like. So we know what we have in the collection because we don't want to purchase a duplicate. And in the same way, we don't want to purchase work from an artist who is super similar to something we have in the collection, because then it's a repetitive statement. And so when I'm looking at a portfolio that an artist puts in front of me, what's happening is on one side of my brain, I have your work. And on the other side of my brain is my Rolodex of 35,000 photos that I'm going through, and I'm kind of like lining them up as I go through, thinking, oh yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's different in this way. It's kind of like that, but it's different in this way. Ooh, it would look nice next to this thing. Like, I'm already like semi-curating in my head and thinking about the similarities and differences. So when curators, I know photographers hate this, but when curators sit there in a portfolio review and ask you, have you ever heard of blankety blank? Fill in whatever blank you want. And names a photographer whose work is somewhat similar to yours. It is not an insult. We are not saying, oh, I like that person's work better. What I'm actually asking you to do is articulate the difference between that person's work and your own. And I'm doing this because I want you to know that other person exists, but I also want you to clarify for me how it's different so that I know how to like file it in my Rolodex. And believe me, the work I see at portfolio reviews, I remember, and I remember for years. And so when you sit down, you put a portfolio in front of me, sometimes I open it and I'm like, I've met you before, but I'm pointing at the photo because that's the thing I remember. So that's basically it. Did I do okay, Swanee? Is that, yeah, okay.
Vikesh said, I would love to hear more about your new venture in inviting an artist and writer to explore the archive. I saw that you recently launched this. That sounds really exciting, and we all want that. We all want to be part of that.
Yes. Okay. So that is exciting. Oh my gosh, 2 years ago, again, no sense of time. I think it's 2011 or something. We purchased a collection of vernacular photography, the Barbara Levine and Paige Ramey collection. And it was the first acquisition of a full collection of vernacular photography by a museum. And we've had so much fun with that collection by putting some of the examples next to high art examples in our collection. So for example, like this incredible snapshot of two women at the beach went right an orbis of two women at the beach. And we want to talk about that two-way street between high art photography and everyday photography. How sometimes artists are mimicking the look of snapshots, but sometimes snapshots try and mimic the look of art. That's all part of the history of photography. So we want to be able to talk about that in our collection. Now, the Barbara Levine and Paige Ramey collection is more than 5,000 objects. And as much as I love research, I cannot take that on. So we thought, what a great way to get people to just like poke around in the collection and tell us what they think is interesting. Let's invite some artists and writers in here. So we designed the Cherryhurst House Fellowship, which is available for a team of one artist and one writer, and we don't define those things at all, to come in together for a week in our beautiful Ann Wilkes Tucker Photography Study Center and sit and poke around in that collection and in our larger photography collection. We are not asking you to produce anything. We just want you to come have fun with photography and then go back to wherever you came from and say, Houston was great. Like, these are our goals for that fellowship. We had our first team come in last week, Jennifer Greenberg and Charles Phoenix.
Oh my God. Unbelievable combo. Oh my God.
They had a lot of fun in the collection. They asked to record their conversations while they were going through the work. I cannot wait to listen to that. It's just going to be hilarious. But that's it. It's you know, I hope it's a great time, and I have heard from the donor that they are inclined to continue it for years to come. So that's great. So look for our next call for applications. And we pay you.
Wow. I mean, it makes me wonder, like someone like Eric Kessels, who is collecting whole projects of vernacular photos and making prints of them and exhibiting them. Is that something the museum would ever be interested in collecting?
Yeah.
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 Anyway, that all his work is amazing. Okay. Be Proud says, okay, so you're 5 years out for exhibitions. How do you prefer that photographers approach you? What's the preferred submission process? How much info in introductory email?
I will always prefer to see work in person or for you to present me work. So like like a cold call kind of introductory email, like here's a PDF attached. I will look at it, I really will, but I won't have the same investment, if that's a horrible thing to say, but I'm just trying to be honest. I love going to portfolio reviews. I love meeting artists that way. It's gotten infinitely easier to sign up for more of them now that they've gone online. I was also saying we have a completely open door policy in Houston. If you are ever coming through town, email us. Malcolm and I will meet you in the study center and take a look at your work for a half hour. We're really thrilled to do that. Anything that will drag us away from our computers for a bit of time is great. I've had artists that I have relationships with already, like email me and say, can I have 30 minutes of your time on Zoom? I'm working on something new. And that's the thing. I think in terms of like the fact that I'm working 5 years out already, how do you even like get your foot in the door for 5 years out? It's a friendship. Get to know me, let me get to know your work and how you do it and what you're interested in, and eventually something will happen. Daniel, where are you? I've known Daniel, who's on this call, for how long? I don't know, but I've always been impressed with his work. There he is.
Sorry, just at the movies.
No, you're at the movies? We've known each other forever. We're friends now. I love looking at his work, at what he's now. I hope you feel comfortable asking me about it. And like, I think I can spill the beans. We're just now working through an acquisition with you. And it's been like 8 years. So,
She's got adorable puppies, I gotta admit.
I have 2 small dogs. So, but yeah, it's all about like establishing the relationship first, because that, even if it doesn't lead to an acquisition, and hopefully it will in the future, but even if it doesn't, I hope that I have some insight for you that will nevertheless help you along the way.
Okay, Kate asks, does the acquisition process for donations differ from the acquisitions based on a curated selection?
Nope, nope. If it's a gift, it's the same thing. I have the same 5 pages to fill out. I have to present it to the director to get shipping approval first, and then 2 subsequent committees to approve it coming into the collection. So nothing comes in easily.
It's interesting because a lot of museums will not take donations from the photographers. They have to come through a collector. So,
Yeah, we will. We want to buy it. It's the truth. We want it bad enough to buy it. What I will do a lot, and I do this with a lot of emerging photographers or perhaps photographers that are not yet represented in the collection. I will ask you to work out a 1-for-1 deal. I will say, I will buy this photograph at full price, because usually museums get like a 15-20% discount because we're bratty like that. But I will say, I will buy this one at full price if you gift me another one. And for me, that's a way to get more of your work in the collection quicker. And I like those to be 2 different bodies of work. So now I'm representing your career more fully right off the bat. And our committee, they love a bargain. Who doesn't love a bargain? A 2-for-1 deal, like, they love it. So though that usually goes really well.
okay, no one asked this question, but it's something I think about whenever I go to a photography exhibit at a major museum. Why is it always Robert Frank? Like, I don't know how many exhibitions I've seen of his work. He's fantastic, but there are so many photographers out there. Why do major museums always show white male photographers
Whew, that is the question.
of a certain era, I should say?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's historic.
Yeah, let's talk about Frank for a second, because I have thoughts. Everyone loves Robert Frank. The Americans is still the best-selling photo book of all time. Steitel is about to release another edition of it. It's just a machine unto itself. We like, museums, especially big museums, we like to give you names you're familiar with, at least one exhibition at a time. So one of the things you have to pay attention to in big honkin' museums like ours is that if you look at the full exhibition calendar at any one time, you are guaranteed to see one exhibition that you immediately know the names and know what's going to be in it. And museums do that on purpose. They want to give you something that you know at any one time. And in photography, a lot of that ends up being Robert Frank a lot of the time. It's a
It
go-to.
sure does.
Yeah.
All right, we will move on. Sonia says, such a fascinating process. How much do you rely on your own personal eye and intuition when you review work versus referring to the photographic historical timeline or what's potentially on trend?
It's a little bit of both. I think most of the time I have to squash any personal feelings. I am a representative of the museum. I am working for the collection as it exists now, and also thinking about how it will look 200 years in the future. I'm not going to get everything right. In terms of trends, it happens all the time. I mean, we are in a vernacular photography trend right now. We were talking about this earlier. Everyone's digging into their personal archives, pulling out family photos. Like, that is a thing that is happening right now. So as curators, we really have to pay attention to who's doing it for what reasons and what might, shake out to the top of all of that. But yeah, we're aware of trends. We kind of make fun of them sometimes. I mean, like, the term ruin porn was a thing, and that wasn't like a kind term to use for a while, but it was the truth. So everyone's aware, but I'm also, like I said, I'm collecting for the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. I'm not collecting for myself. Those collections would be radically different.
Yeah. Do you collect work personally?
I'm actually not allowed. It's a conflict of interest for a curator to have a photo collection, which is why I collect cameras. The thing is, you have to offer it to the museum. If you,
Yeah, I remember once Karen saying if if a photographer sends her a photograph, she has to refuse it. And that was like,
yes,
whoa, I had no idea. So that was really interesting.
yeah.
Um, James Payne has a really interesting question. What about long-term projects that span decades? How
Mhm.
does a photographer find a home for that?
Um, you know, I am a museum curator. I still collect an object. So the first thing that came into my mind is, well, what is the form of this long-term project? Is it 20 prints? Is it 100 prints? Is it, 200 small prints? I don't think it's the concept that's ever the problem. If it's a long-term project, great. We love that you've been dedicated to something for so long and have a particular vision and a really unique perspective on it. But what is the final form of it? Is it a collectible thing?
Yeah. All right. Carl asks, what would you suggest to an emerging photographer who is interested in eventually having work in a museum and doesn't have work in the $50,000 range? Well, I would bet that is everyone here
Yeah,
tonight.
yeah. It is 99.9% of the photographs we
After an Opie, maybe, yes.
yeah,
But
yeah, and actually, like, even when I'm collecting, I'm not even gonna get, I will. The $50,000 thing is, we have one endowment for art that you can't even tap into it unless the work is $50,000 or more. So it's actually harder for us to fund something that's $40,000 than it is something that's $60,000. It's just like a weirdness of my particular institution. Sometimes I cheat. Like I bought some vintage 70s work by William Wegman 2 or 3 years ago. And so like I said, it's a portfolio of prints. Wegman didn't make portfolios, but like I basically like packaged 4 photos together to get over the $50,000 mark just so I didn't have to like individually fund those things. But in terms
so you're saying we need to raise our prices?
of, well, that was the first thing I was going to say to this photographer. I work with emerging photographers all the time. I can name, I won't embarrass them here, but inevitably, if I am their first experience with a museum curator, if this is their first museum acquisition, I'm going to send them the scary email that says, I'm going to call you in 30 minutes. And I do that because I'm like, you need to at least double your prices. Like, I think one of the things that doesn't happen in like photo world or photo reviews, or if they've come out of an MFA program, is there's no discussion about how you should be valuing yourself. And I don't exist if you guys don't exist. My position is dependent on artists. That's just how it is. So, a lot of times they lowball thinking that like that's going to make the work more attractive. But quite frankly, for an institution like mine, if we're interested, we're interested. And like, I'm going to pay it. So, make sure you're asking for what you're worth. And that might take some like kind of uncomfortable questions or weird emails, which I'm the queen of, with like some of your colleagues, but work it out. Because if somebody's asking how much it is, it means they're like mostly in already.
It's interesting for artists trying to figure out this journey. And we learn about editioning, but everyone has a different opinion on editioning. And we learn about pricing, and everyone has a different opinion on pricing. And so there's no like definitive course of action. So it's really hard for artists to really know the exact way to position themselves. But that's not your problem. I'm just making a comment.
No, I think, I always encourage them to ask people they feel like are at the same level as they are. Like, so and so just sold one work to a museum. It's their first museum acquisition. How much did you, like, what was the price of that? Like, I think just like we're trying to have more open and honest conversations about salary within the working world, like, I think photographers need to have more open and honest conversations about pricing structures. Like, yeah, not everyone's Kathy Opie, like, of course, but like, you can find someone who you feel like lines up with you in some way and then like see what they're doing. I also,
Yeah, but I feel like a curator and a gallerist are going to have different opinions on price too.
well,
Maybe.
I can't say that somebody has ever quoted me a price and I've been like, oh, well, now I'm out. That's never happened. If I feel like the price is a little high, I'm going to come back to you and say something like, could you discount it to this? Or, I'm going to try and like help you out. Could you, if we buy it at that price, could you gift us 2 prints? I'm going to try, I'll make the numbers work for me. Don't you worry about me.
Yeah.
Make it work for you.
Okay, we are not going to worry. Swanee asks, is the curatorial library open to researchers?
Yes. So I hope everyone comes to Houston. I mean, if you don't come for PhotoFest, come at some other time of the year. Our photography study center, which has recently been renamed after the amazing Ann Tucker, is open to visitors all the time. You can make an appointment and literally see anything that is in our collection. It will be brought out and you get to sit there alone with it for as long as you want, which is an amazing opportunity. We also have an incredible photo book collection talking about Robert Frank. We have first editions of Robert Frank's Americans in every language that the first edition was published in, and his maquette for the Americans. You can ask to see all that. And that's just in the photo study center. We also have a library in the museum that's open to the public all the time. Our chief librarian, John Evans, is very interested in photography and actually, I don't know if you all heard, just purchased Alejandro Cartagena's entire collection of photo book maquettes for the library. So now those are all available to anyone at any time. So we love researchers. Come on down.
I know you're getting tired, but I do have to ask if the museum is interested in NFTs.
We're looking at them. I kind of took it upon myself in the past 6 months to really learn about them. And I called some friends who we all probably know. I called Chris Graves first.
Yes.
As someone who is so dedicated to making portfolios and making books, why are you making an NFT? Like, I understood what an NFT was, but I didn't understand why. And then I called Alejandro Cartagena next, who set records with the sales of his NFTs. And I see, what is an NFT? A non-fungible token. It's like a digital file that people can buy. I know, it's crazy.
You're buying someone's digital file, not a print. It's something in the ether, and you don't know if it will ever be a print, but
Right.
and you can make all your own prints and do everything else. It's not exclusive.
No.
So,
Right.
but you have to be young and smart and understand this very complicated platform.
Well, there are people that will help you. But what was interesting to me is that they both said it opens them up to new audiences. I'll be really honest, they made me feel like I was failing artists in some ways as a curator. So they said that doing this NFT work has opened them up to new audiences. They talk directly through this, like there's a special chat thing to the collectors of other NFTs. And they feel like they're really supported by them, and that collector is always eager to know what comes next. And I'm like, well, we are like that. I mean, we love you. I want to know what's coming next. But I realized I should start connecting artists more to our donors who are paying for their work, who do love them and want to support them in that way. So that was something I learned. And also Chris Graves, being Chris Graves and like brutally honest with me sometimes, said like, well, my work's out in the world now. And I said, well, that exact same image is on the museum's website. Anyone could see it at any time. And he said, well, when's the last time the museum actually promoted my work? And I was like, oh, So that was why I changed my Instagram actually to promote artists' work, because I can't do everything. I can't change the structure of my insanely large institution. But I can do some things. And if these are two of the reasons they are attracted to NFT world, I can do that too. But I do think NFTs are here to stay. Maybe not in the form they are now. I think just like any other medium, they're going to find their correct expression eventually. But I do think they're here to stay. But the museum's going to be slow to catch up. We really are. Always slow. We're just now getting hang of video art. So NFTs, it's going to take a long time. Yeah.
Well, I know there's more questions, but I think we need to give you a break. Lisa, thank you. This has been an amazing evening. You've been so open and honest and real. And, we all want you as a reviewer. It's really such a pleasure to see your evolution as a curator. So bravo to you, and thank you everyone for coming and asking great questions. And I hope you learned something tonight. And I hope you join us on December 14th with Paula Tognarelli. Don't tell her. And so thank you. Lisa, stay on for a second as everyone departs, and read the chat because you're getting lots of love.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Good night.